Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. In the meantime, Dr. Borba has asked if everyone would make sure you have a piece of paper and go ahead and fold that into fourths and make sure you have a pen or pencil, something to write with. And then we'll get started, like I said, in just a moment. Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people are still joining, but we will get started. So first, let me just welcome everyone to Let's Talk About Prevention. Today, we have a wonderful presentation by Dr. Michele Borba, and we have folks joining us from all across the US as well as internationally, so we're super excited. My name is Stacy Pendarvis. I am the Vice President of Programs at the Monique Burr Foundation for Children. And as many of you know, whether you're a facilitator of our programs or you've joined us for the three previous sessions of Let's Talk About Prevention, our mission is to provide the best evidence-based and evidence-informed youth-focused prevention programs in the country and the world. We have reached over 3.5 million students since our programs began in 2010, and they're comprehensive, so they cover bullying, cyberbullying, all types of abuse, exploitation, and many more types of victimization. So on behalf of the entire MBF team, I'd like to welcome you today. This is the 4th webinar in this series, and we really decided to do Let's Talk About Prevention in the wake of COVID because so many of us lost our professional development opportunities for the summer. So let's get right to it. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Michele Borba is a wonderful friend and supporter of MBF and what we do, and we're so excited to share her with you today. You're in for a real treat if you've never heard her speak. And in the interest of allowing her more time, I'm going to read you a very abbreviated version of her bio, but you can read more about her on her website, micheleborba.com, and we'll share that on a slide at the end of the presentation. Dr. Borba is an internationally recognized expert and author on children, teens, parenting, bullying, and moral development. Her work aims to help strengthen children's character and resilience, build strong families, create compassionate and just school cultures, and reduce peer cruelty. She received a doctorate in educational psychology and counseling from the University of San Francisco, a master's in learning disabilities, and a bachelor's from the University of Santa Clara, and a life teaching credential from San Jose State University. She is a former classroom teacher who has worked in regular education as well as with children with learning, physical, behavioral, and emotional disabilities. Sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. And in private practice with troubled youth. Her practical research-based advice and her amazing stories that you'll hear are culled from a career of working with over 1 million parents and educators worldwide. She is a motivational speaker around the world and a highly respected media contributor and the go-to expert on parenting, bullying, prevention, education, and child-teen issues. She is an NBC contributor, appearing over 100 times on the Today Show, and is the regular parenting expert on many other shows, such as Dr. Drew's Life Changers, Dr. Phil, Dateline, The View, The Doctors, Fox News, The Early Show, and CNN. Dr. Borba is also an award-winning author of 22 parenting and educational books, including Unselfie, one of my favorites. She also has a new book coming out in March called Thrivers, The Surprising Reasons Why Some Kids Struggle and Others Shine. And she has received too many awards to name. So with that, I'll say thank you, Dr. Borba. We are all looking forward to learning more today, and we can get started now.
I'm just so delighted to be here. And thank you to all of you from all over the world, because we're all in one concern together. How do we help our kids? So let's look at some very practical things that we do know based on trauma therapy, and as well as what we can do in our classrooms. The key that I realize that many of you don't know is, are schools going to open? Are they not going to open? But let's start with what we do know. We do know that our kids are hurting, and we do know that our kids are worried. And we always know that the best educational policies are to flip so that we meet their needs. We're talking about in May, we looked at a very large survey of teens across the US. 7 out of 10 were already worried and concerned. But 61% said they were lonelier, feeling very lonely. 55% were experiencing anxiety. Thank you to the UK for also being online, because you also did a very fascinating survey of your kids' primary age when the school doors did reopen. And the main thing that came through was that your kids were very concerned about fears. And that was, they were worried about going back. They were worried about catching new viruses. Safety is a huge concern. Finally, we're looking at China. When they reopened, we had the same thing, and we looked again at students, and we found that number ones across the board is that increase was unbelievable on depression and stress and anxiety. What that tells us is that we've got to reset the dial button and look at what our kids do need when they walk into our classrooms, or if you continue to be helping them from afar. The most important research I want to look at today is what we do know is preventative. It's the psychological almost immunization that we can give our kids, and it's called resilience. Resilience does work and it is teachable, but there's some big myths about it. Number one myth, it is not a program. It is far better off if we use it as an umbrella to teach everything, because we also know it's not one trait. I've seen a lot of programs, well, let's just teach this one trait. No, we know that it's a series of different traits, and we're going to choose the ones today that matter most to our children. The third thing, and it's already a question that came up, but what about the kids who are older? Is there any hope for them? Yeah, it's never too late. We ourselves need to reboot our resilience. So when we look at those factors, the final thing, it's not locked into DNA. What we do know is resilient children are made, not born. I'm going to take 1 second to tell you the research that confirmed that to me. I just finished writing my last book ever called Thrivers, because I was so concerned about, can we really teach this? The woman's name was Emmy Werner. She's from the University of California at Davis. She had the same question as every single one of you. Is there hope for some of these kids who are really enduring unbelievable trauma? Not all of our kids are. Most of our kids are really doing a kind of a shared distress. But some of the kids we were worried about prior to this pandemic, we're even more so worried about now because of the home environments that they're dealing with. What she did is look at hundreds of children growing up that they were tracked from birth until 40 years of age. They were growing up in homelessness, in poverty, addiction, schizophrenic parents. She kept watching and watching and watching these kids, and almost 90% of those kids until the age of 40 were still part of the study. What blew Emmy Werner away that should shake us all up is that 1/3 of them are doing quite fine, thank you. They survived it, they bounced back, they overcame. That's what resilience is. It's not one trait. But then when she looked at the how, what happened? The single most important thing, besides if there was a parent, it was a teacher. One teacher who refused to give up on that child, who knew that child was hurting and said, I'm going to be there for that child, that caring teacher. That's every one of us. Parents, you are profoundly powerful if you model calmness to your child. I know you're not doing really well right now. We're none of us are. But let's figure out how we can create protective factors. The piece of paper you have is because I don't want you to write down 50,000 things. I want you to write down 4 things. And I'm going to go through the 4 most important factors that Emmy Werner said we can use as educators, as counselors, as parents to help our children. There are 4 C's. So I'm going to go through each one. The first one I want you to part up there is just C, means connection. Connectors. Who are the kids that we worry about? How the heck are we going to know what's going on in their lives? And there are some little things that we can do. Put down C for connector. And then as I give you ideas, lots of different kinds of ideas. None of them cost a dime. They're all evidence-based. Let's figure out the 1 or 2 that you want to do, write them down and pass them on. The first thing to call connectors, it starts with, we got to find out more what the heck is going on in terms of trauma. So let me describe a few things. The first thing you may want to do if you're an educator is reach out to another educator. Start joining up together as a staff. Read 1 book, not 50,000. Read maybe 1 book. Nanine Burke-Harris has a fabulous new one. She wrote The Deepest Well. I'm not suggesting you read any book in particular. I'm finding one that works for you, and then maybe all year long, keep reading the same book and discussing trauma so you're all on the same page together. As you discover new pieces of information, like the UK research that came out, or here's the new thing that just came out from Johns Hopkins, that 1 in 3 of Americans, that means adults, are really suffering and feeling anxiety. Maybe you can create email blasts, start emailing one to each other going, here's a new piece of information. Whoever one of you is the technology expert, take it on. You can't empathize with kids unless you understand where they're coming from. Other things that you may want to do, and that is, besides looking at research on resilience and research on trauma, is that you need to understand that not every child is going to be personally impacted by this. There are 4 factors that I call 4 Ps. These are the 4 kids you really want to tune into. Most of the kids, honestly, are going to have some whips and valleys, but they're going to do fine and they're going to bounce back. First of all, in any kind of a trauma or a crisis, the more personally involved the child was, or the closer to the proximity of the trauma. For instance, in 9/11, we know that our children who were right there impacted the greatest source of trauma and had PTSD. Doesn't mean that your children are going to be experiencing that across the board, but who's the child who maybe had a death in the family? Who's the child whose family lost everything and is financially destitute? Who are those kids? Put those kids at the top of their list. In a few minutes, we're going to pass those kids on. But the second thing is, the second P, who are the kids who had pre-existing problems? Pre-existing problems meaning they already were stressed. They already were suffering from depression. They already had some issues in that classroom. A crisis only amplifies those. Put those kids' names down because they're not improving. Chances are they will escalate and be more of those issues when they go back. Third is, did they have protective factors? Resilience is made up of a number of traits that are teachable, such as self-regulation, optimism, empathy, kids who have hobbies. Interestingly enough, kids who use prayer or spirituality. Those are kids that Emmy Werner said they didn't go through a program or have a counselor, but they had something that helped them sustain. If those children don't have protective factors, put those kids on the top of your list. Those are concerns for my children. And finally, do they have a caring champion? Is there a parent that you know is going to be able to be there for that child? Or is there a grandmother who can step in? One of the most powerful studies that I ever learned was from Bruce Perry, who's unbelievable in terms of trauma. He got into the field of trauma after he was working in an adolescent residential treatment home. And he realized that all the kids were getting the same trauma kind of therapy approaches. But for some reason, 1/2 of them were doing better than the other half. How is that if they're all getting the same approach and we're all doing the same kind of trauma therapy? He looked a little more in depth and he discovered something. Shake yourself up, folks. The single greatest commonality of that 1/2 who endured and did better is that they happened to have the night shift janitor. Bruce Perry said, what is about this night shift janitor? What did he do? He's there for us. He's always calm. He asks us, how you doing? One person can make an enormous life. If it's not the parent, it's you. So the next thing, you've got a list and you're starting to write down some concerns of names. Maybe set up a staff Google Doc. Here's the kids we're concerned about. Here's another thing. How are you going to find out what's going on in their children's homes? Reach out to the parents. Can you either prior before school, or maybe you're continuing to Zoom with those children? Ask the parents to reach out to you. Can you please tell me one thing that's going on, or how is your child doing? Or is there one thing you'd like me to know? If we got that kind of an email from every parent, it would help us empathize with the child. Warsaw, Indiana did a fascinating thing. These are really simple ideas, but Warsaw superintendent wanted the teachers to buy into this. The teachers weren't 100% sure that, is this kid really going through some stress and trauma? So what this superintendent did, you can do instantly too, is set up a survey monkey. A survey monkey costs $300. He asked every teen, these are over 2,500 kids, to go to the survey monkey and take 1 minute and write on that survey monkey the one thing you wish that I knew or we knew about you. You don't have to put your name down, just anonymously, just fill it out. Or if you would like some help, let us know. They then just printed them out and gave them to staff members who sat there with their mouths open going, I had no idea of the stress that these kids were going through. What we got to do is help our staff empathize with our children. I am assuming you already have that empathy because you checked into this webinar. Our goal is to reach out to others. Suppose you have kids that are now coming back to school. A simple thing that one teacher does is just have every kid fill out an index card, and it's just my one thing. My one thing is the single one thing I wish you knew about me. Or here's the one thing that's happened to me over the last 4 months. You can do the same thing with a Zoom call. One other thing that I love, again, don't try all of these things, but is there one you'd like to adapt? This one came from Canada, yay Canada, Calgary. This is a principal who said he had some kids he was really worried about. He didn't know what to do to help the other staff members realize about the kids. And ethically, he couldn't tell the staff a lot of things that was going on. But he knew from connecting with the parents that there was some things that were very troubling going on in the homes. What he did that you can do on Zoom as well, of just your staff members together, a photograph. He said, this is my kid that I've chosen this month. This kid is really going through some troubles. Here's the kid's name. Here's the class he's in. Please reach out if you see this child, or just send, if you know this kid, a little personal, how are you doing? It was absolutely phenomenal of the impact that it had on the kid. No, he didn't need to stop going to counseling. But what he did do, each child bounced back a little more. When I asked the principal how he's going, he said, it's absolutely amazing. Every single staff member is now adopting one kid on a photograph, and every staff member is passing it on to the other staff member. Watch out for this child. He may be coming up in your Zoom distance class as well. So the first thing is C, connectors. You got to understand where the kid is coming from. This is a flip. Instead of teaching the child empathy, we've got to opt it ourselves. How are we going to know who our children are? What are some simple ways we can reach out and find those information from the parents? What are some ways we can pass that information on to our staff members so they are more empathetic with the kids that they're dealing with? The first C, connection. It's absolutely critical. But the next thing is caring. That's you. What are you going to do in order to reach out and help those kids? I want to pass on some information, because what we do know with children with trauma, there's some very interesting commonalities, though each kid is going to be able to take this a little differently. A lot of things they do is they become a little clingier. There are times that we know from the UK, the children are more fear-based because they've been hearing more and more about a virus, and so they're worried that their parents are going to get it. Many of your teens are feeling really destitute. Is financial, my home, are my parents going to be able to make that income, to be able to make all of, just in terms of what we're going to be able to keep going? So here's the first thing. Is there a routine way that you can connect with your students? I ask this about you because one of the most interesting things have come up from parents who've been emailing me with tears saying, you won't believe what the teachers are doing to help my child. So let me just give you some of the most breathtakingly wonderful caring deeds that you're doing. Find one that works for you. Kids said to me on a webinar that the thing they miss the most about school is the first 5 minutes of every class. I said, what's the first 5 minutes of every class? The kid said, oh, that's when we don't talk content, when the teacher says, how you doing? Or what's going on at home? Or did you make that soccer team? Or what are you reading? He says, we really miss those first 5 minutes. So idea number one, if you're doing a Zoom class, or if the kids are coming in, spend the first 5 minutes of how you doing, how you going. Maybe it's writing on an index card, because many kids aren't going to be able to raise their hand. They're a little more distant. They're not going to be able to open up. We've got to draw it out to help them. The other thing that I'm loving, there is a kindergarten teacher. I found her on Twitter, And the father is the one who tweeted this out saying, "Bless teachers, this kindergarten teacher has changed my son's life." He was so worried. What's the kindergarten teacher doing? Every night she's doing a check-in by reading a book out loud on just Facebook. What she's doing is she's asking all the kids who want to just join the Facebook read aloud. And every night it's just a different, like, from Leo the Late Bloomer to could be nothing more than, Wembley Weapon or Wednesday Surprise. But it's a check-in with each child to let them know she cares. My favorite, it's going on right now, and that is Jeff Berger White. This is a drum roll. Today, I just received my 116th email from this teacher from Deerfield High School. He's so concerned about his kids. He deals with teens, and he is a literature teacher. So what he does is every single day for the 116th time, he sends an email blast to every one of his students with a poem. Each poem is always relevant about what's going on now. For some kids who don't like to read poems, he records it. So all you have to do is push it and you can hear it. But I said, "Jeff, how's it going?" He said, "I had no idea how much impact this was having on my kids." I said, "Can you tell me what the impact is?" He said, "Well, let me just send you a couple of emails from the students." This one just came in the other day. "Mr. Berger White, I don't think any of what was going on in our community and the world hit me until I read your poem this morning. I can't even get through this. It's so amazing. My friends all say they've been crying, but I never saw the need to. Everything was going back to normal, I thought. I heard your poem and I don't know why, but I broke into tears. No adult or teacher has ever been consistent with normal life but you, with your poems, and I think that it's something everybody needs. This type of normalcy is what I've been yearning for, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for providing it to me and my classmates at this time." How glorious is that? That's because he found what worked for him. It wasn't one time, it was repeated. One other one, Friendstown, Texas gets another drum roll. This is a black, where we're talking about. This is Friday night lights. Every single Friday night is the big football moment for that town. And what the superintendent realized is that normalcy wasn't happening. Football times weren't happening. So what the superintendent decided to do and what that whole town does do is every single Friday night, the lights go on. The lights go on around the football field, and the kids say, "We can see the lights everywhere," and it means the teachers are thinking about us. My point is, find one way that you can connect with your students to let them know you are there. Here's my email if you need something when the kids do come back to class, because I know some of you around the world have your kids coming back to class. Maybe you can put just a little mailbox. We're talking about a real box on your desk. A high school teacher says he's doing that. Anytime you want to write me a note, just slip it in the slot and I'll get back to you later. Send notes that are just little how you doing notes, maybe at the bottom of their test. But we've got to keep finding ways to connect and empathize with our children. What our kids are saying that they want more than anything else is routines and rituals. Third thing, how are you going to help your kids cope? Coping is the strategy. Amy Warner discovered that along the way, that one of the highlights of kids who can bounce back, that's the resilient child. It isn't that they don't have stress, but they're able to handle the stress a little better, is that they've learned coping strategies. If there's anything that we can do as educators, I think it's hit the reset button and say, this is not a learn it in a health class. This is an everyday 1 minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes a day in a class the moment you walk in, or it could be the beginning of every Zoom class. I'm saying this to you because according to students, I did a lot of interviewing them. They said that they are the most stressed out generation known to man. Every kid across our US admitted we are stressed. That was prior to pandemic. I said, so what would help you? Every kid said, if you teach us a coping strategy. And I'd say to the kids, but your school is teaching SEL, or your school is teaching whatever strategy it is to cope. And every kid said, but it's got to be ongoing. You don't learn that stuff in a worksheet. You don't learn that stuff in a one course. You got to do it and make it into a habit. So if I was to say, here's the coolest thing I'm seeing, and it's research-based, it works. It's called Quiet Time, and it started in the Oakland schools. So let's take a moment and let's look at what they're doing. Doesn't cost a dime, and maybe we can figure out how to implement it in our classrooms, or I'll show you how to do it in Zoom instead. Counselors realized that many of their kids were in trauma. They're in a high poverty area. This is a group of kids who every day were walking to school. Middle school kids having to text one another of which roadways to overlook and go a different route because it wasn't safe. By the time they walked into their classroom, do you think they're tuned into your dynamic lessons? No, because when trauma builds, attention span and focusing also goes down, which is why we've got to be more flexible with our lessons, and we've got to also work into shorter lessons so that we build into our kids' brain abilities so they can handle just nuggets of information at a time. Second thing the counselor said to the principal, these kids have got to learn a coping strategy. They've got to. Principal said, what are you going to do? The counselor said, we'll go into each classroom and we will teach how to do mindfulness or meditation or deep breathing. 3 different alternatives. Many kids said, don't just do meditation. That works for some kids. Mindfulness works for some kids. Koosh balls works for other kids. You got to give us a repertoire of stuff so we can figure out which one works for us. But then it's got to be done over and over again. What the counselors did was come into each of your classrooms and do a 3-minute, 5-minute demonstration lesson. But the counselors also did something brilliant. They had one kid in each class film it. So they left the tape with you. That means you at the end, when the counselor leaves, can replay the tape so that you're doing it the correct way. Let me just share one thing with you. I worked in a lot of overseas Army bases, and I've worked with a lot of children who were in a lot of trauma. But the commanders of those bases told me to go talk to the Navy SEALs. I said, why? I said, because we are retraining their brains in the most amazing way you could possibly imagine. I said, what are you doing? When I asked the Navy SEALs, they said, well, one thing we're doing, very similar to the Oakland schools, so they're going to mesh in a minute, hang in there, is slow, deep breathing. I looked at him and I said, yeah, I know it looks like it's touchy-feely, but it really works if you do it right. Step 1, we all identified our stress signs. So maybe, teacher, the first thing is to have each child track. We're talking maybe for a month. What you know are your signs. What tells you you're starting to get a little irritated? You're starting to get a little stressed. You can have them jog it and write it down. In fact, I was viewing a New Zealand school and every kid had a journal. And the first minute of every day, can you imagine? Every kid in New Zealand was tracking their stress signs, which is the first thing, and it's going to be different for each child. You may want to put up just a big old poster on your wall or send it out on Zoom. Here are stress signs. Some kids, they grind their teeth. Other kids, they say they can feel it right here, or they can feel their cheeks start to get more flushed. Some kids say, I get really, really irritable, or I start going like this to my hands. One kid said, I can't think. And the teacher acknowledged them all and said, good, you know what your signs are. There's a whole bunch of different signs. Get those signs out to kids. And then track which are yours and when are you most likely to feel that sign. Parents, if you're right at home, track your kids' stress. They don't have it all the time, but you'll notice if you track it down, maybe it's at 10 o'clock every morning, or maybe it's at 5 o'clock. Track your own sign. Mine's at 5:30 because that's when I'm trying to do the meals and everybody's around. We all have our witching hour, but if we know when our most prime moment is and we track it, we're going to be more likely to empathize with that child and warn them. It's almost time that you're starting to get that stress because maybe it's when the time test is, or maybe it's when you have to turn into that partner sharing, figure out what their triggers are. Each Navy SEAL knew their stress signs. Now go back to Oakland. because the moment that stress sign came in, each child would take a slow, deep breath, but they practiced a minute a day, every single day. In fact, they got to the point they added 5 minutes, 1 minute off of each class, a little bit off of each lunch, so that there was 5 minutes when you walked in. Every single kid in the whole school did deep, slow breathing. Navy SEAL said it's got to be deep from your tummy. Then hold it. Here's the key. You slowly let it out. I know some of you know it, but the Navy SEAL said this is the key. The exhale must be twice as long as the inhale. You got to keep practicing it, they said, because at the beginning you do it kind of not so smoothly, and it doesn't give you the relaxation process. What happened at the Oakland schools, because they did it 5 minutes now every day, focusing abilities went way up for trauma kids. Behavior problems reduced. Suspensions prior to pandemic went down. But the reason that the superintendent is now mandating it in every single school is the test scores went way up. Find one coping strategy. That is number 3. Find a way that you can help your children learn it. Maybe here's another idea. Send that video of the counselor, or maybe have the kids practice doing it. Then film them, put it on a flash drive, and send it to every parent at home. Can you imagine if we did it at school and parents did it at home? Or how about the Boys and Girls Clubs did it? If we started reaching out and did this so it isn't just us in the first period, but all of us are doing it, that's how you maximize gains. The key in life is you find one thing. You find one thing that's going to keep working. Another strategy. This is for younger kids, but I'll help going up to the older kids. The key is the coping strategy has to become a habit. So you keep doing it over and over and over again, so the kid no longer needs a reminder. Number 1 is the red stop sign. This is a small one that went home to every parent. There was a huge one the size of my door that was on this every door in every classroom. But the Zoom teachers for distant learning, I keep saying the Zoom teacher because it seems like that's what we're doing, send it home also as an email blast to every parent saying, try this. Red is the moment you start to feel that stress sign, the Navy SEALs would say, tell yourself, chill out or calm down. In fact, the Navy SEALs also say that they create some kind of a positive affirmation. Again, they said, I know that sounds touchy-feely, but the moment we start to feel our stress come in, we say, chill out, or I got this. Each one of them has a different sign or a different mantra. Maybe one other thing that you could do is have each one of your students come up with what's your mantra going to be. If you're dealing with a young child and you're a parent watching this, then your voice is the way your child learns it. You got this, Johnny, you got this. You keep saying it and repeating it over and over again until the child, you'll hear them say, I got this, I got this. When your voice becomes their voice, that's the gold mine. So the first step is identify your signs and tell yourself chill or relax or stop. 3 is take 3 slow, deep breaths. That 1-2 breath. And the green, they said, is now start to get into the green mode and calm yourself down. Calm yourself or count to 10. What they did at the school is have every parent do it. They sent it over to the Boys and Girls Clubs to have them do it, and they did it in every classroom. How about a real trauma-induced child? You know who they are. They're either watching them and distance learning, or they're in your classroom. One of the simplest things that I saw one teacher do in special ed was give a child who was in such disarray, unbelievably, because of the trauma and the abuse in the classroom. She put bungee cords at the bottom of the child's desk, wrapped around, because her feet were constantly moving like this, because her whole body was constantly in disarray. But the teacher also said, you got to tell me when you really hit your mark, when it's so much that you need a timeout. They came up with 4 different kinds of poker chips. The blue was put it on the top of your desk. She didn't let anybody else know what those chips were for, but the blue was, I'm really having a really sad day. The red was, I'm having an over-the-top watch out day. I'm in such anger and disarray, I can't keep it together. The green was, I'm doing pretty good. And the white is, watch out, I just maybe would like to talk to you. The child didn't use those all the time, but she used those periodically. And it became this wonderful strategy between the teacher and the child. Then the teacher realized what the child needed. Some kids want to be touched. You got to ask. Other kids, it actually creates more of a dissension. So find out, is putting your hand on the child's shoulder work? Maybe it's just getting down to eyeball level. Do you need some help? Can I help you? Is another strategy that you could use. Find what works for the child. In some classrooms and in some homes, create a space that's called a calm down corner. And suggest the parent, if you're still doing distance learning, have one in the child's home. Let's look back to Emmy Werner and let's look back at what works in that calm down corner. Again, it's everything you already have. Parents, if you're watching this, the greatest calm down corner you can have is a sheet over the top of your dining room table. It is a reading fort. Emmy Werner said children, many of them who are resilient, went into a book that just gave them a release. I'm just going into a different place. And maybe every single night, routines and rituals. Kids need control in a crisis. Routines, rituals, predictabilities. Now we're going to do this, then we're going to do this are helpful. Maybe it's 7 o'clock every night. We're going to go into a reading fort. Grab the dog, grab the pillow, grab the flashlight, grab a good book. I'm going to be giving the Monique Burr Foundation 101 books on a list that you are wonderfully impactful books that can boost empathy. There's also 50 films that you can watch of clips that just open up empathy and heart. I'm just saying that these are times if you're watching at home and you're wondering what to do, films in the right book actually elevate children's empathy. They reduce stress if they're correct kinds of books. That's the way to go with it. Now, in a classroom, go another way. Maybe it's nothing more than in San Diego, it was nothing more than just a simple beanbag chair. And it was a beanbag chair that just said, calm down. There was this spot here and the child just raised their hand and there was a signal. The signal in the classroom meant, I need to calm down. And the teacher immediately said, which meant just slowly go to that calm down corner. And there was just a box. You can do this at home. You can encourage your kids when you're doing distance learning to put together a calm down box. For some kids, it's a koosh ball. For some kids, maybe it's this, that's all I need. For some kids, it's a few books that just give them heart. Just a few of these that could be, that's there. One child, Natalie, I love this kid from New York. I said, Natalie, how you doing? She says, I'm so stressed. I said, okay, so what's helping you handle the stress? She said, oh, this. I said, really? She said, no. I'm putting a playlist of music that really helps me. Teens say this is ideal, but many kids aren't doing it. I said, what's on your playlist? She said, soothing classical music when I'm really, really feeling distressed and I can't hold it together. But then when I really need to just get upbeat, that I can be a little more optimistic, because she admits I catastrophize everything. Everything is just going to be the worst thing possible. I find music that just makes me think, no, it's going to be okay. I said, okay, what's your best music? I love this. She said, oh, it's Elton John. I'm still standing. I crack it open, just put it on my ears and just walk around the house going, I'm making it. I'm still standing. Emmy Werner in Resilience Theory says, music for some children is ideal. So maybe it's a calm down corner and it's places that you can do. In schools, it's a mood room that I need a space to go. And if you have an extra space, someplace in a school classroom, if ideally with a counselor there, and again, that's my sense called ideal, what you can then do is have your child go there and feel a little safer about it. What we're looking at is coping strategies. And the final thing we're looking at is, I think the Creole in life is called cheerfulness. It's hope and optimism. 4 things: connection, caring, coping, cheerfulness. Why? Because Emmy Werner said one of the most critical variables that helps kids endure and bounce back is the ability to learn hope and optimism. The most amazing thing is that hope and optimism are teachable. So let's look at How do you teach hope and optimism? University of Pennsylvania is probably the best in this. What they've actually been doing is looking at our kids who really were suffering from a lot of trauma. And what they discovered along the way, and this is never a one-time lesson, and it is never a one-time program. Remember, it's ongoing. That a few skills were critical to teach kids. When kids are in crisis and when fear goes up, control goes down, and they need to feel like they have some control over their life. Teachers, parents, problem solving, brainstorming. Well, for little kids, it's a pocket problem solver. It's my favorite thing. I used to do it with my own kids. And it's, what's the problem? Name it. That's your thumb. Now name 3 things. Boom, boom, boom. What else could you have done differently? Like, oh, I can't figure out how to solve this. I can't do it. I'll never get it done. Okay, that's the problem. You don't know how to solve it. That's your history lesson. So what are 3 things that you could do differently? What are 3 ways you could solve it? I could ask the teacher. Yep. I could check online. Yep. I could read the directions. Yep. Of those 3, what's the one you're going to do? What University of Pennsylvania discovered is that if we keep teaching our kids problem solving, it begins to reduce some of the stress, some of the pessimism, and opens up their optimism. Now, problem solving is one. Let's go back to the Navy SEALs. UK, what your study said is one of the biggest concerns of kids is walking outside, because we've been telling them about how unsafe it is outside. They've been watching, for heaven's sakes, a steady death roll. Can you imagine what our children have been viewing on TV? The first thing is turn the TV off so they're not watching the dismal kinds of news. But let's look at what the Navy SEALs are doing. They chunk their fear. After they take the, I got this, I can do it, they take the slow, deep breaths. They said they chunk their fear. So what do you mean you chunk your fear? I said, well, can you imagine going through a battle? These are the most elite forces in the world. Our goal is not to get through the whole battle. Our goal is to get through the first 5 seconds, then the next 10 seconds, then the 15 seconds. We chunk the fear into manageable dosages. Do the same with your children. Parents, when they're overwhelmed with all of that, hint number 1 is tell them to do the hardest thing first. Whatever is on your list today, do the hardest thing first, because they worry about that. Get the fear out of the way. That's the first way to chunk it. Second way is we need to all start helping our kids learn to feel safe walking outside. If that is 1 out of 3 kids said that's their biggest concern, then how do you chunk it? Today, let's open the window. Watch what you say, because fear is contagious. Next day, let's open the door. Third day, notice we're chunking the fear. Third day, let's put our toe out. 4th day, let's walk 3 feet. 5th day, let's walk to the mailbox. Chunk the fear into manageable dosages. Here's one other thing that I want to suggest, and that is there's a lot of ways to build optimism, to curate cheerfulness. One of the things is chunking fears. Another one is helping kids feel a little bit more control. Other ones is to watch the dismal news. Remember that dismal news diminishes empathy and increases stress. When empathy goes down and stress goes up, the next thing that happens is burnout. Educators, we're all facing that right now. Parents, we're facing that. Cut what you can. But what we do know from Jonathan Haidt is that images also can elevate our hearts and reduce our stress. And here's some of the best ideas I've ever seen. A group of kids from Long Island told their superintendent in March, right before the pandemic hit, that they were really, really just distraught with all the bad stuff and news they were hearing in the world. Superintendent said, well, what can we do? And one kid said, can you buy a big plasma screen, just a huge big plasma screen, please, and put it in the front quad? Why, said the superintendent, because then when we walk into the quad, what you can put is the good stuff that's happening in the world. What a brilliant idea. Jonathan Haidt from NYU said that is incredibly brilliant, because now you're looking at the good stuff. You're mobilizing a child's heart. You're seeing that there's hope for the world. And what the superintendent did was cut out articles of real good, wonderful kids. They're always in the back page of the newspaper. They're about this big. Blow them up and do good news every day. I happened to be there that day, and in the quad, I can't tell you how many dozens of kids were just hunkered down around this plasma screen looking at the good stuff that was happening in the world. You can do the same thing at home, and you can do the same thing with your distance learning, and you can do the same thing at the beginning of every class day. How? Well, you start cutting out the good news, and here are 4 fabulous good news reports. Let me just get to a couple. Number 1, 2 kids, Philadelphia. They got so tired of the bad stuff in the world, they did the exact same thing. A 10-year-old and a 15-year-old during the pandemic went down to their basement and they said, hey, why don't we just start recording good stuff that's happening? When we hear good stuff that's happening in our neighborhood, or we hear about the helpers out there, let's record it. And they started making a little video, and they sent it out to a few friends, and their friends gave it to their parents. And their parents said to the girls, can you keep doing this, please? So 3 times a week, those girls now have good news reports that have gone viral. Everybody in the world now wants to read and see those good news reports. Now, some other ones, what we do know about optimism is that if you help your child learn to contribute, to give back, to do something, so they're not just hunkered down in their house, but they're actually thinking of somebody outside or besides themselves, it's one of the best stress reducers and the best ways to build optimism. You can suggest that, teachers, parents, you can suggest the same thing. Good news reports, 2 boys from Texas. What they realized is that their grandmother was in an assisted living and didn't know how to set up a Zoom, didn't know how to do Skype. So what those boys are doing is getting online and doing free Skype tutors reports to assisted living homes, teaching them how to set up a Zoom, how to do Skype, how to do FaceTime. They're seeing such gratitude from the assisted living that they're saying, we got to keep doing this. What happened is that the news went viral. Other kids are copying it. There's dozens of things you can do. I think the bottom line to all of this is realize that there is 4 C's. I purposely chose these 4, even though there are other real life traits that you can teach for resilience. Because in social distancing, in a moment of crisis, in a moment of a pandemic, these are the 4 that seem to matter most. We've got to connect and figure out which of our kids needs the help. How do we get into their shoes? How do we understand trauma? How do we pass it on to other parents? The second thing is we got to let the kids know we care. Friendstown High School says putting on those lights at the football field saying, I don't know where you are, but just know we at the school are still caring about you and thinking about you. That's powerful. Jeff Berger White every single day for 116 days, sending a poem and then describing why it matters now, is changing children's lives. It's finding it works. Third is coping skills. If I was to say what's the best one, they don't cost anything, but quiet time from Oakland schools. Let's just cross off 30 seconds or a minute, or let's do it in over our distance learning. Maybe that's the way to help all kids learn a skill. And finally, we got to create some optimism about the world. I'm going to stop for a minute to help you answer any questions that you may have, but I also just want to mention one final thing. I think we're so worried, and legitimately, about our children. Please know that many of them will do fine. Many of us will do fine. Worry about those kids with those 3 P factors who have had prior existing issues, the proximity and personal impact that they've had by any kind of a trauma. And let's also look at one other thing, that when we look at Emmy Werner's research, there is actually one more P. The single greatest commonality of who endured, who bounced back, despite the horrors of trauma, was that the child had a personal champion. It was a parent, it was a grandparent, or in many cases, it was a teacher who refused to give up on a child. I end this with Mr. Johnson, who was a psychologist from Long Beach, who said, you have got to keep telling this message to teachers because it's tough We're burned out, but they got to know that we really can make a difference. I said, okay, I'm there. He said, so I'm going to tell you about one kid I had. Okay, tell me about the one kid. He said, this kid had unbelievable trauma from sexual, physical, emotional abuse. I won't even begin to describe how horrible the abuse was to this child. And legitimately, that's real trauma. Now, the only way he could cope was to become catatonic. So he, at one point, would do nothing more than, for months on end, roll back and forth. No matter what you said to him, if you touched him, you never got a response, because that was the only way he could cope. Mr. Johnson was doing his residential treatment home in a place where this child was now institutionalized for a while. And he said he refused to give up on the child. He just always talked to him. And of course, the kid never responded. So please don't assume that the kid is. And one day this kid was rolling back and forth. Let's just call him Robert. And Mr. Johnson was getting himself a Coke. And he got the Coke because he was rolling back and forth right next to him. He said, oh, how rude of me. Robert, would you like a Coke? And of course, Robert didn't respond, but he put in some coins and said, here you go, Robert. Have a good day. Here's a Coke for you. I'm going to miss you, Robert. This is my last day. I've got to go to another school now, but I'm always thinking about you. Mr. Johnson said, I didn't know what was going to happen to this child. I figured I'd never see him again, and I had only the worst possible thoughts. And then one day, I was in a special ed school site, and I was doing bus duty. And I'm standing at the bus line, and all of a sudden the school bus driver rolls up and said, hey, are you Mr. Johnson? And I looked up and said, yeah. He said, bus driver, there's somebody who wants to say something to you. And I looked up, and all of a sudden, this kid opens the window, sticks his head out and said, hey, Mr. Johnson, it's me, Robert. I just wanted to thank you for that Coke. The bus rolled off. He said, I fell to the ground. I had to have a couple of teachers pick me up. I never realized I was breaking through. Sorry to get so emotional, but this kid was unbelievable. But he is making a thank you because you refused to give up on the child. So go hug yourself, take care of yourself. That's the other C. I'm going to turn this back over to you. What else and other questions do you have? And thank you for the Monique Burr Foundation. You guys are absolutely the best place to work for ever. Thank you. Oh, I need Kleenex.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was just amazing, as usual. I took notes. You see all my notes? Amazing. I'm not in the classroom, but I have children. They're a little bit older, but all this information I think will help them as well. We always learn so much from you. We only have a few minutes for questions, but I want to ask you a couple of questions that we got. One is, are there any tools or exercises we can do to help others empathize with people that have experienced bullying or trauma?
Yes, the most important thing is reach out to that person. What we now know is when we ask victims, or let's call them targets, what works for you? The first thing that they say is just somebody reaching out and saying, you didn't deserve this. In fact, that's the most amazing one when we say what works best. The second thing is, what can I do for you? Or can I walk you to report this? Asking for what you can do is also powerful. Giving stories or other ideas of this is one strategy, or here's where you can go for the help, seems to be really helpful. But when I ask targets, what's the single most important thing that anybody ever said to you is you didn't deserve this, and what can I do? And always being there for me so that they didn't think that I did something to cause it seems to be the critical turnaround piece.
Okay, awesome. Someone else asked, are there other ways to healing besides empathy?
Oh, yes, because what we do know is that all of these, for instance, empathy is clearly one of them. But empathy is also, when we think of that as kind of just my heart piece, there's also the cognitive side of empathy. So it's try to understand where I'm coming from, not getting into the touchy-feely part, which sometimes can actually activate us more. Those of us who are highly empathetic, we're all dealing with compassion fatigue right now because we're putting ourselves and our heart out. So how you heal the trauma, what we've discovered, and we're learning this with first responders, is to, instead of thinking about the person personally and just getting to yourself overwhelmed, giving yourself permission to step back and think about it from a cognitive perspective. I need to give myself permission to step back. I can't take it all on. I think the most amazing thing was Mother Teresa, who did the greatest quote I think ever. She says, if I look at all the masses, I would have quit. But what instead I do is I look for one person and I try to help the one. I think that's really a critical piece. What we do know from trauma is that if you help another, even if you're in trauma, it can be amazingly soothing. Reaching out and finding a support group, even if it's just one person, can be amazingly soothing. And finally, if you really are impacted by trauma, then please don't think that you have to do this all by yourself. There are extraordinarily well-trained counselors out there. If your child, you're worried about your child, then maybe it's time to pick up the phone. Go to the pediatrician first and say, who would you recommend? And go that way.
That's great. Thank you so much. So we're about out of time. First of all, just again, Dr. Borba, thank you so much for being here. We're so blessed to have you as a supporter of MBF and appreciate your time today. We also want to thank all of our attendees from all over. I was looking at the chat a little bit. I saw somebody from the UK, and I know we had a lot registered from other countries. That's amazing. For attendees, we want to remind you that you will get an email later today. It will have the recording and a lot of other resources, notes, and things that Dr. Borba mentioned. And then I hope everyone will just take a minute to check out MBF prevention education programs. Dr. Borba's information today was amazing because it's talking, she helps us understand how the ongoing skills that she was talking about is a great foundation for kids. But our belief is that if you add MBF's proven programs, that we can help educate and empower kids to prevent bullying, cyberbullying, digital abuse, and other types of trauma. So check out our website. And then if you have any questions about our programs, reach out to us. Here is Dr. Borba's website as well as our website. So if you have a pressing question that she didn't get to, she does have a contact form on her website. But there's so many resources that if you go to her website, you'll probably get your question answered between her books and some of the resources that she shared with you today. So thank you all so much for joining us. And we hope to see you next time. And thank you again, Dr. Borba. Everyone have a wonderful day.